Hey there, Alex here. Despite having pretty good experiences with Huawei phones in the past, I haven't tried one in a while, namely due to the lack of Google services, but I am curious about how things are these days, so let's take a closer look at the Huawei P50 Pro. Huawei's hardware has been pretty solid for quite some time now, and the P50 Pro is no different. I'm not the biggest fan of the very shiny back panel and curved display, but the phone does feel really well built and looks unique enough with this camera bump design. It also has IP68 rating, wireless charging, and a decent set of stereo speakers as expected from a flagship device. The screen itself looks decent with nice colors, good outdoor visibility, and refresh rate can go up to 120Hz, though if you're using dynamic mode, the phone seems to run mostly at 90 or 60Hz, and will only do 120Hz in a very small handful of apps to save battery. Anyway, the fingerprint sensor is pretty decent, but the position is a little too low for me. The P50 Pro is using a Snapdragon 888 chipset, so as expected, performance is pretty good, but it has the tendency to warm up quite easily. It's not really an issue in day-to-day use, especially when indoors, but it can get a bit toasty when using the camera outdoors. Thanks to the US sanctions, there is no 5G support, but that's not a deal breaker to me at all because 4G speeds here in Singapore are actually pretty good. Battery life is just okay though, despite its battery size. I could still get a day of use out of the phone, but not much more. Maybe it's because apps are not as optimized. It supports up to 66W fast charging with the included charger, which can top up the phone from 0 to around 70% in just 30 minutes. In terms of software experience, EMUI is still based on Android, so the interface should be familiar enough to most folks. I kinda feel like it looks a bit dated, but it has a decent amount of customization options and features. That said, I'm not a fan of the iOS style notifications and quick settings. It's a bit of a hassle since I can't swipe down on the home screen to access those features like I can on most other Android phones. There is also no double tap to sleep. But the biggest deal breaker for me here is of course the lack of Google services. If you're like me and rely heavily on their services, you're not going to have a good time here. There are some workarounds for certain Google apps using G-Space, but that's a third-party app, and I'm personally a bit too paranoid to sign into my Google account using that. Anyway, even if you're okay with it, you might still need to sideload some apps that are not available in Huawei's AppGallery. While they do make it really easy to sideload apps, not all of them will work properly since some of them might require Google's safety net for security purposes or Firebase for push notifications. That said, I did find a good amount of apps that I use in the AppGallery, like Telegram, Grab, VLC, PowerAmp, and Adidas running just to name a few, which is much better than I had expected. There are a decent amount of apps from local banks and telcos as well, and even a few of the more important ones from government agencies like SingPass and TraceTogether. I was initially also a little concerned that sideloaded apps like Instagram and WhatsApp would have issues with push notifications, but they seem to work just fine. So for folks with lighter usage and don't rely too much on Google services, they might actually be able to live with EMUI. Anyway, moving on to camera performance, the main camera performs decently well in most lighting conditions, but sometimes I do notice a slightly slower capture speed. Image processing is a bit on the heavier side with a bit more saturation and sharpening, but they do look pretty decent. The ultra-wide and telephoto cameras are just okay. They work well in good lighting, but can struggle a bit in low light. Telephoto range at just 3.5x optical is a bit limited, so even though it can go as far as 100x digital zoom, the result is not that great. It has a monochrome sensor as well, which supposedly helps with image processing, but it's still a pretty fun camera on its own. Video quality is decent, but not amazing. Same goes for the front-facing camera as well. So overall, it's a decent shooter, but just not quite as good as what other high-end phones like the S21 Ultra has to offer. All in all, at the recommended retail price of 1,548 Singapore dollars, it's a tough phone to actually recommend. Even if you can live without Google services, the software and hardware both leave much to be desired, especially now that we're starting to see newer 2022 flagship devices hit the market. It's a bit of a shame really, because I think Huawei did a commendable job building up their own services and trying to get developers on board over the past few years. But I think because they had to spend so much of their efforts in those areas, they couldn't improve the other aspects of the phone as much as other manufacturers. And at this price point, it's very hard to ignore those shortcomings. Personally, I feel like perhaps they should focus more on making budget-friendly phones that are good value for money, so that it will give people some reason to look past some of the compromises they have to deal with when using a Huawei phone. This might attract more users, which in turn might make it easier to convince developers to come on board. Anyway, I'm definitely hoping that Huawei will keep trying their hardest, because having more options is always a good thing for consumers. Thanks for watching this video, and see you guys on the next one.